Hello, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Mary, and this is Beth, and we're part of the team at Writing Magazine and Writers Online. Hi, Beth, how are you?
Hi, really well, thanks. I'm really excited to introduce this week's guest. Matthew Sullivan is the author of the novel Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore, which was an Indie Next pick, a Barnes& and Noble Discover pick, and the winner of the Colorado Book Award. His essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, Daily Beast, Spokesman Review, Sou'wester, and elsewhere. He grew up in a family of 8 kids in Aurora, Colorado, worked as an indie bookseller in Denver and Boston, and taught creative writing for 20 years at a community college in rural Washington state. And his latest book, which we have had the absolute pleasure of reading, Midnight in Soap Lake, is out now.
Welcome to the Write Club podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Are you in your usual writing space? And if so, could you describe it for us?
Yes. I'm in Washington State, kind of in the upper left corner of the US between Seattle and Vancouver. And I live in a tiny town called Anacortes, about 1,500 people, and it's a really cool town. It's got two bookstores in a town of 1,500 people, and they're both great bookstores and kind of an active library. And I really kind of for my writing space. I recently bumped out my house and created this office on the back. And I did that after many years of working in this very old greenhouse that was plate glass walls, plate glass ceiling. And where we live, it's quite temperate. But for about 5 months of the year, it was either freezing cold or else just like burning hot. And so in this greenhouse where I was working, I would have during the winter, I would have like scarf and hat and like those kind of fingerless mittens on, and I'd be huddled between these heaters, and I would still be freezing cold. And then in the summertime, I'd be sitting out there in like jogging shorts and just like sweating. And so it's really nice to have an office where I have, four proper walls and temperature control and all of that.
Wow.
There's part of me that kind of misses the greenhouse though, because there's an aspect of kind of simplicity to places like that, where it's like you don't have anything else to focus on but the work. Because if you focus on everything else, you're going to be like focusing on how cold you are or how sweaty you are or whatever else. And so there's something about that kind of discomfort that I think was actually good for the writing process. So now I'm kind of comfortable, and we'll see how it goes from here.
I guess that helps you to write quicker as well if you are freezing or sweating to get the job done so that you can get out of there.
This is true. This is true.
That's amazing. We've heard so many different stories from people on this podcast about their different writing spaces, and greenhouse is a new one. We've heard like shed in the garden and
Yeah.
bookstore and attic and all sorts. But yeah, greenhouse is a new one. I like it.
Yeah. For a while, I had a little trailer, like a little camp trailer, and I would work in that, like in my backyard, and that was kind of cool too, because it was very distraction free, and like the kids would be like, "Where's Dad?" and I would be out there,
But hiding.
hiding out totally.
It'll be interesting to see if you stick to your lovely room that you've created for yourself, or if you have to go back and suffer a bit more.
Yeah, I know. The suffering is where the
Yeah,
the
that's
muse
what did
comes
it.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Beth said, we've really enjoyed Midnight in Soap Lake. I've actually been carrying it around with me all week and sneaking in a chapter here and there as I was gripped and I needed to know what was going to happen. For our listeners, could you give us a brief summary of the story, please?
Sure. So it's a psychological mystery, a standalone novel, and it's based in a real place called Soap Lake, Washington, which is a very small town of 1,500 people where I used to live. A little tiny town in an agricultural area that's on this very rare mineral lake. And so I fictionalized that, and because I'm a crime writer, I made it quite dark. And so as the story opens, Abigail, who's a newcomer to town, doesn't know a soul. She's out walking on these irrigation roads, and she looks out into the sagebrush and sees a little boy running toward her, and he's covered in blood. And she soon finds the boy's mother has been killed, a young woman named Esme. And so on the one hand, the mystery itself is kind of a way for Abigail to make her entry into this town to kind of learn about its people, learn about its secrets. It's kind of a haunted community. It's kind of a quirky, kind of colorful community at the same time. In that sense, it's a pretty straightforward mystery because she's trying to solve, what happened to this woman, Esme. But on the other hand, and this was really important to me, I wanted to tell Esme's story as well. So the book alternates between Abigail's quest to find out what happens and Esme's life from the time she's a little girl, going to the library, playing in the orchards around town, and all the way up to the night of her death. And the idea behind that was that in kind of focusing on Esme, by the time we get to the end of the book, we see her not as the kind of traditional victim, which is the sort of plot device or the body in the library, but rather see her as this kind of fully realized human being who readers empathize with and kind of have feelings for, you know, on the page. And so the braiding of those two stories was really kind of an important part for me of the writing process.
Yeah, I found the all the different techniques that you kind of use throughout the book really fascinating. And I always know when I am enjoying a book because I won't rush it. Like I knew that I had to speak to you today and I was like 70% through and I was like, I could rush the last 30%. I could, but I was really enjoying it. And I was like, I'm just gonna keep it slow. So I've not finished it yet, but I am very much enjoying it, hence the slow reading. And I needed to ask you as well, the giant lava lamp, is that
Yes.
real?
Well, the concept of it is real. So Soap Lake was this town it was kind of a resort town. It was a thriving place throughout the 1950s, 60s, and before that, between the wars, it was the short version of it is that the Veterans Administration discovered that the lake had these particular healing properties that soldiers returning to the U.S. after World War I with these terrible diseases, most notably Buerger's disease, which is kind of a circulatory disease, a disease of the flesh. They essentially discovered that the lake could heal these soldiers. And so it became this kind of, they built a VA hospital there. It became this sort of hub for soldiers returning from the war who had these like terrible injuries and so on. And from there, it became kind of a resort town and so on. Then it really fell off the map. It became this kind of ghost town. When I moved there in the early 2000s, Main Street was really quiet. There were hardly any businesses open. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of drug use. It was just one of these places in the rural West that had seen better days. And so there was a guy there at the time who was trying to come up with ways to kind of bring tourism to Soap Lake because the lake itself is beautiful. It's just this stunning natural resource. And so he had this idea of building the world's largest lava lamp in Soap Lake as a way to kind of return it to its former glory. And he hung up posters all over the place. He did this media tour. He was interviewed by hundreds of media outlets. The BBC came to town and did like a little micro documentary on this project. And so it never went anywhere. But there's a lot of hope behind it, and it kind of, in a lot of ways, it captures the kind of quirkiness and again, like the color of the place. It was kind of just this really interesting, very remote community that has this somewhat hippie vibe, somewhat libertarian vibe, somewhat kind of Trumpy vibe, and it's like this hodgepodge of all of those things in this little tiny spot around this very rare lake. So just kind of a strange place. The lava lamp has not yet arrived, but there is hope. We're always we're always hoping that someday it will come.
Oh, that's amazing. I had to ask because I thought there is no way he's come up with this. Like that is so random.
It's so random.
So
Yeah.
random. But I think it is a really good like metaphor for a lot of the things that are happening in the book as well without giving anything away. It as weird as it is, it fits. Which is
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
random.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when you tell people that there really was a plan to do that, it's a lot of times it is that kind of, the truth is stranger than fiction
Yeah,
mindset. So I had to get it in there somehow. So I kind of fictionalized it in my own way. And
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. And there is a lot of different plots in there, a little bit like the character Preston's Wild Innocent Incident Map, which is like a spider's web. How do you go about plotting and then keeping track of those different story strands without getting yourself lost all in it?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring up that scene. This is a scene where Preston, who's this conspiracy theorist, has essentially kind of created this three-dimensional murder board that's kind of connecting all of these different crimes together. So it's like this kind of giant cat's cradle almost that he's created. And in the plotting of this book, I started to feel a little bit like that. There was
Hmm.
this meta fictional quality where what Preston was going through and kind of making all these connections was very much what I felt like I was going through as the writer, which was kind of spooky, but also interesting just from a process perspective. So, because I was really writing two books and shuffling them together, because I have Abigail's story and then I have Esme's story, for the most part, I actually wrote each one of these straight through, kind of as one book, knowing all the time that I was going to braid them together. And then I would kind of look at the two stories and try to find places where they would overlap and where Abigail's story could build on something that happened during Esme's childhood. And it was difficult. It was definitely a big challenge, but I also and I struggled a lot with it. But when the pieces clicked into place, it was really cool. And it was one of those things where it was like, wow, this is kind of why we do this, where
Hmm.
something happens where you feel a little bit like this was not only unexpected, but kind of way beyond what I had anticipated could happen here. And suddenly it's almost like, so Paul Auster, the writer, talks about how he often would combine different stories. And he talks about how when you blend stories together, when you braid stories together, it creates this almost like magnetic field and a third story emerges, right? You have like story one and story two, but the connection of those two creates something else. And I feel like there is this element of kind of mystery and surprise in that third element because you can't quite see it until those stories collide. So, like in terms of plotting, then bringing those things together, technically there were a lot of like note cards. I had like individual chapters that I would staple together, like print out and lay next to each other on the ground and say, okay, what if this goes here and this goes here? There was a lot of cutting where I'd say, okay, I have all these hundreds of pages, many of from like Esme's childhood. And if I didn't find a way that it connected with the contemporary mystery, out it went. So it really was like, I'm going to make this the most difficult task possible for myself, like reinvent the wheel. I'm not sure I recommend it, but it was definitely, I'm pleased with how it turned out, how these two stories kind of culminate in the end, the timelines kind of merge. And so
Mm.
the night of Esme's death coincides with the solving of the crime. And also, kind of importantly, back to kind of why Esme is given so much space in the book, I really wanted to connect the emotions of that death with the logic of the solving of the crime. Because a lot of times in mysteries, by the time we get to the end, by the time the mystery is solved, it's like we've left behind the emotional weight of the victim's death, right? And so restructuring it, replotting it this way, it's like we're living that death emotionally as Abigail is solving it. So you have both the kind of logic and emotion clicking together in the end.
Mm. Yeah, it makes total sense to do it that way. It almost makes you think like, why are mysteries not all written like that?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that there's an element of um, it's kind of a bummer.
Mm.
Honestly, it's kind of a bummer when you're reading a mystery and you feel the kind of emotional weight of someone's death. Because a lot of times when we read a mystery, we want escape, right? We don't
Yeah.
necessarily want this kind of realism that, a human life was lost. So I think that's why. I think a lot of readers are like, look, I don't read mysteries to have this kind of to be like crying over the
Yeah.
victim's death, right? I read them because I want to like get away from the news and the horrors of the world and escape a little bit and just enjoy the pleasure of a story that takes me out of these places. So it's
Yeah.
an interesting question though.
Yeah.
I think you did that well, though, really well, because it is a thriller and it is gripping, but you didn't shy away from emotion and bringing in a bit of current affairs and, making
Mhm.
us think. And I think that's really good. I think a lot of thrillers can be a little bit throwaway. So I think you
Mhm.
balanced that really, really well.
Well, I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
definitely. When you think of how many thrillers and mystery books there are out there, it's such a popular genre that, like you say, Mary, you can read it in a couple of days, read another one in a couple of days, read another one in a couple of days, and then that first one that you read a week ago, you've forgotten about because it doesn't sit with you as much. Whereas I feel like this one does a lot
Mhm.
more than just your average kind of mystery. How long did that take you to like from start to finish put together? I'm really interested to know.
I think this one, I think probably, I'd say 3 years
Wow.
is probably about right. Yeah, I mean it's hard because I was working full time and just piecing it together. I kind of backed off from teaching the week that the pandemic started. Just
Oh
totally
wow.
by coincidence. I went from full-time teaching to part-time teaching. So I was like, this is the week I'm gonna like, take some time and write full time. And part of it had to do with a move and my wife's job and that kind of thing. And so all of a sudden the pandemic hit and I was like page one of this book, like literally the same week. And so it was a good time to kind of go all in. And I'd been taking notes, I'd been working on it before that. But talk about an immersion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too because I've talked to a lot of writers who, when the pandemic hit, they just kind of froze and
Mm.
were not very productive. And for me, it was totally the opposite. It was that thing where it was like, I think in part because I had always scrambled for time. I had always been kind of fighting for time to write my entire life. Well, basically since I was like 20. And so I would, do things like write on Friday night when my friends were going out to the bar or I'd, like take a vacation from work and like go to the woods in a little trailer and bring a laptop and like unplug for a month and just like completely immerse in writing a book or whatever. So when I actually had time to write, I was like all in, like I've devoured it.
Oh wow, that's brilliant. And
Yeah.
there are elements of an urban legend, and kind of a creepy X-Files sort of vibe to the book with was it Treetop as well? He's kind of lingering around in there, scaring the heebie-jeebies out of everybody. Um, how do you create those atmospheres and feelings in your work?
Yeah, so Treetop, yeah, he's this kind of urban legend who lives in the orchards outside of town and really has a grip on the psyche of the place. Like children tell stories about Treetop on the playground, and then adults have their own version of the Treetop myth. And there's a town parade that has a giant Treetop kind of puppet that marches down the middle and scares everybody. And so for me, there is this kind of interesting connection between life and fiction here. And this is not at all conscious. This is just after the fact. I've just noticed this in my writing. I tend to create these figures and I see them as these fictional manifestations of the devil. I grew up in a very devout Catholic household with, my seven brothers and sisters, and we were like 100% convinced that the devil was like knocking on our window, haunting us. We were definitely we believed 100% that the devil was just like this real entity that was like right around the corner at all times. And really, like, there was a time where I would hear knocking on my window in the middle of the night every single night at the same exact time. And this went on, I feel like it went on for like a year, but it was probably like a few weeks or something. And it was the devil like coming to haunt me. And so I know it's crazy.
I bet you and your
Uh,
siblings were really well behaved though, right?
we were actually we were monsters. We were total monsters. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like we had this very devout household, but it was totally chaotic. It was a really wild household. So it was both this combination of like kind of religious and dogmatic on the one hand, and then just like crazy psychotic on the other hand, and lots of fun, but also lots of violence and all the rest of that. So in my writing life, then I've just noticed, like in my first book, Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore, there was this kind of outsized killer called the Hammerman, who was like this, the killer of this like awful thing that happens, who really haunts the people of Denver for years. And a similar thing is happening here with Treetop. And to me, it's like, it really is like a manifestation of this like irrational fear that we feel as children. We kind of give these entities like all of this power. And when you're a kid facing that, you just feel so minuscule and so vulnerable. And there's something really interesting about kind of teasing that out on the page. Importantly, though, I think this is all subconscious. Like I never kind of made these connections until afterwards. And I think as a writer, it's so important to kind of follow those things when they happen on the page. Not to like ask, like, is this going to upset anyone? Why am I like wrestling with this? Why am I noodling down this particular path? Why am I following this segue? Just to go with it. Because you're obviously, like in my case, I'm like working shit out. You know what I mean? Like I'm clearly, this is, like Matt therapy hour. I'm clearly like digging into something. And I think as a writer, it's important to follow those things and just like trust in the process and trust in your subconscious and see where it takes the story, you know?
Yeah, and trust that it's relatable, because it definitely is to so many people. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of us have our own like devils from childhood, whatever they were for
Yeah,
some reason.
whatever it is. But on,
Yeah.
and also there's all that stuff in there about how it's powerful people controlling other people. He's a
Mm.
fascinating character. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, completely. People using those myths, those urban legends to their own advantage,
Mm.
like the devil.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wrote an article for Writing Magazine and you discussed genre writing, and you say that genre writers, we can set out to scratch the itch of familiarity for readers, but once we've learnt the rules, we can break them. And Midnight in Soap Lake has been described as cozy horror, one of the many new emerging subgenres. How do you feel about these less restrictive classifications?
Yeah, I feel like we should not be thinking too much about genre as we're writing. So formulas are there for a reason, right? We're supposed to hit these particular beats. We're supposed to, follow these particular patterns in storytelling. Some of that is marketing and publicity, and some of that is kind of, just the tradition of a particular genre. But I think when we're writing, of course, we want to, if we're writing a mystery, we want to have a body or what have you. We want it solved in the end. But I think that they can be constraining. And I think that, we were just talking about stories that can be somewhat forgettable, that maybe are sticking so close to formula that they're not differentiating themselves from other stories, that they kind of blur together. And I think as writers, when we have the opportunity to kind of use these formulas or these patterns as almost like a scaffolding that we return to, but also force ourselves to be creative. This is creative writing, and to take risks and to innovate and to ask readers to kind of go along for the ride. I mean, it's really like we live in this really amazing time for genre fiction. There's so much being published that is just kind of blurring the distinctions, blurring the lines between genres. And I think that when we allow ourselves kind of permission to kind of go where the story tells us it wants to go rather than thinking too much about like where's the librarian going to shelve this, then we're opening up an aspect of the creative process that is really wonderful, and it's why we do what we do. It's originality. It's about being creative and imaginative and kind of tapping into those things that got us to sit down in front of the computer in the first place, or the pad and paper, or the cave where we're doing cave painting, right? This is the creative act, and we should be kind of immersing in that and digging into that rather than feeling like we have to kind of stay in our lane, otherwise we
Mhm.
won't get published. It's like
Yeah.
that's not really, if the story is telling you to go somewhere, go there.
Yeah, rather than thinking of the end point all the time.
Yeah,
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 100%. And I think that's really important as well because a lot of authors can really pigeonhole themselves and kind of start to not really enjoy the process if they're trying to stick to all these rules and, like you say, make sure that they're following everything that they should be doing for that particular genre. And then it kind of defeats the object of writing. If you're always
yeah.
thinking about what you need to write to get published or to make money or to sell, then
Mhm.
it just you fall out of love with it. And we've heard that from so many people on this podcast, the people that they have maybe not sold as much as they wanted to, but they absolutely loved writing it. And that's because they wrote what they wanted to write, not what the world wanted them to write, I guess.
Yeah, you can't really game the system. I think it has to be about the work. I mean, maybe some people can, but I think that readers can tell. If it's like, well, the latest hot thing is, vampires with who sparkle or whatever, like Twilight or something like that. After Twilight came out, I was teaching creative writing, and like all of my students were like writing sparkly vampire stories, right? Vampire romances. And you could tell that like their heart wasn't really in it. It's like you can't really game the system. Readers can tell.
Mm.
Readers can tell if this is an authentic story written by somebody who really cares about it, or if it's somebody who's just like, I just want my paycheck, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also liked what you said in the article about how breaking away from genre limitations is actually a really great way of fighting against the AI plagiarism that affects our industry, and it's a massive topic at the minute. Could you
Yeah.
just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess similar to what I was just saying, I feel like the one thing that we have as humans that we can contribute in this, process is our originality, right? Like our creativity, our imagination, our originality, that's what sets us apart from these machines that essentially are just like copying and plagiarizing and scraping and collecting all of the hard work that humanity has done and essentially looking for patterns and spitting it back out. The thing that's missing there is originality. There's nothing original happening. It's just kind of like pattern making and stealing, really. And so I was at a conference not too long ago with a panel, and one of the writers was talking about using AI in the process, and not on a level of line, but using AI to kind of come up with plot points. Like, okay, I'm stuck. What should I do next? And ChatGPT would say, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. And I mean, my jaw dropped. And actually, it was a writers' conference. And so 99% of the people in the room, our jaws dropped. And one of the other people on the panel said, why are you giving this to the machines? Like, why are you giving this up? This is the one thing that we have. Like, this is the gift, right? And so I think, I don't know, maybe thinking of that as a gift, thinking of that as something like, what can I contribute? What is it that I have that I can add to the page that sets it apart? If AI can and has scraped all of these things that we've published, all of the stories that we've told, and has been able to kind of master the formulas, then it's kind of up to us to contribute to those formulas, to add to those formulas, to do something different from those formulas, to set ourselves apart. And like right now, it's not one for one. Like you can tell when a book or some writing has been generated by AI, but it won't be long before we can't tell the difference. And so then it really is on us to say, okay, well, what can we add? Like what makes my story different from the garbage that is being spat out by AI? and these tech
Mm,
companies who are making a buck from it
yeah,
and
absolutely.
ruining the
And
planet while they do it. Sorry.
yeah. No, you make sure you
Yeah.
get that bit
Yeah.
in.
Yes. Thank you.
But when you were
Uh,
talking then, I was thinking about, you printing all your different chapters out and having them on making your own spider web. And I can see you sort of in your room with your piles of work. And then there's, you're bringing in where you live and you're bringing in your childhood
Yeah.
stories. That is something that a computer cannot ever replicate. That is so personal.
It's so human. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's a really good
definitely.
point. Yeah.
I it's interesting actually how much, or it's I say it's interesting, it's terrifying how much AI knows as well. And especially when you think like all, all of these books are behind paywalls, you have to pay for them to read them, or you have to have a physical
Mhm.
copy in your hand. I asked it the other day because I had started reading the third book in the Good Girls Guide to Murder series,
Yeah.
and I could not remember. It'd been years since I read the first two, and I could not remember at all what had happened in the first two books. So I just
Yeah.
asked ChatGPT, like, can you just give me a quick recap because I've forgotten. And the amount is of stuff that it knew about what was inside those books without, like, it's obviously not bought the book, it's not paid for the book. So how does it know this stuff?
Mhm.
I thought it
Yeah.
was, I mean, it was useful for me at that time because I
Yeah.
would have had to go back and read the first two books, and I did not have time for that. But
Yeah.
you can see how that is such a bad thing for the industry. The
Uh,
fact that you don't have to necessarily own the book or read the book to know the book.
It's not always
Yeah.
right though, because I had been reading a book and there was something that I wanted to find out. Today there was a quote and I couldn't quite remember it. So I looked it up just on Google and it brought up the AI answer and it was wrong. It was the wrong line that it brought up. So that's
Oh,
important to note. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely good to make sure that the information that is actually coming out of it is actually correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And sometimes the mistakes are really troubling.
Yeah.
Like I was doing some kind of Google search on, I was trying to remember which Toni Morrison book this plot was in, something like that. And so again, the Google like AI response that shows up at the top of the page, the kind of auto-generated AI, started telling me that this was a Maya Angelou book,
Oh, wow.
which is when you think about it's obviously like number one, it was totally wrong, like absolutely factually incorrect. Number two, the nature of the mistake was to combine these two Black American women authors into one, make them kind of interchangeable.
Wow.
Jeez. Yeah, that's
That, I mean,
terrifying.
talk about like that is a troubling
Yeah,
mistake.
that is. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
going to
that
remember
is
that
awful.
when I'm talking about AI with people. That's a good example, that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to your career as a um, tutor, how do you encourage your students to find their unique writing voices?
Um, Boy, that's a big question. A lot of what we've been talking about is originality and thinking about what is it about their experience, their life, even their kind of quirks and their personality and sense of humor, those kinds of things. What is it that they can really bring to the page that's going to be different from the person sitting next to them? I think that's so important, that kind of originality and really like as you were saying, just tapping into the kind of humanity of the writing process. That becomes kind of clear to readers on the page. And an aspect of that is revision. A lot of times I find in my own work that I'll get something rough out there on the page, and then as I'm working, I'll kind of go back and revisit it and maybe I cut a little bit out. Maybe I kind of just, a character will say something differently and it opens that up to a different path. And then I go back to it again and it's like I changed this word or I changed this phrase. And suddenly what to me, what I feel like happens is something that is maybe not fantastic in its first draft, starts to gain a little bit of life. It starts to have a little bit more personality. It starts to kind of pop a little bit on the page. And I think that just that active revision is really what you're doing is you're like bringing your best self back to those words. It's like you can only do so much in a first draft, and then in a second draft, and then a fifth draft. And each time though, you're kind of like shaping it according to who you are and what you want from it. And I think that that aspect of just thinking about the long game, thinking about like this might take a long time. Maybe your first book isn't going to go anywhere. Maybe your third book isn't going to go anywhere, but a drawer. Um, Eventually, if you're kind of trying to make the work as good as it can be, then you and what you can do as a writer is going to come through.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And we always say that it's something that you could be proud of at the end of the day if you know that you've put the work into it and you're happy with it, or even if you're a bit like, oh, actually, I don't know if I think it's any good, but other people think it's great, then
Yeah.
you can say that, hey, I'm a writer and I've written a book and like I'm proud of that, rather than just thinking of it, every other aspect of the publishing world.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
And
It's
on,
like you're putting your imprint on the page, right? Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's such a lovely way to think about it. And talking about publishing, would you be able to talk us through your route to publication?
Man.
Have we got time for that?
We do not have time for that. I will keep it very brief. So the short version is I wrote several books that did not go anywhere. I had some little nibbles from agents, but this is years of my life. I did go to graduate school for creative writing, mostly because I wanted time to write. I had been working as a bookseller and I was editing on the side, and I had a lot of different things going on. And I just found that writing was starting to take a back burner in my life. And so I basically started applying to graduate schools, and I picked schools that were in rural areas in the West because I wanted to live in a tiny town where there was not much going on and not a lot of distractions. And I picked programs that were 3 years long, 2 or 3 years long. So I ended up going to University of Idaho, small town, 3 years where I could focus on writing, and I ended up getting into teaching while I was there and so on. So that was an important piece for me, was like going to graduate school. And then I wrote again 2.5 novels that just ended up in a drawer. And then I wrote a book that called Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore, got picked up by an agent. I worked with that agent on editorial kind of feedback. He was giving me feedback. I didn't really like the feedback. We did that for about 2 years, and then he dumped me because he wanted the book to be something that I didn't want it to be, which was really devastating because all of it, I'd worked so hard and for so long to get an agent, and then I got one and it just didn't work out. He had a different vision than I did. And eventually I got picked up out of the slush pile just completely randomly by the agent I have now, who is fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. And I feel like I'm so glad that my process, even though I wrote a lot of books that didn't go anywhere, and I had an agent that was difficult, or it was a difficult experience, that I ended up where I am after all of that. Like I wouldn't trade it for anything, even though back at the time, all that rejection and pain was awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything happens for a reason, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels like that. It feels like that. And you don't, I think back on those early books and I'm glad they didn't get published.
Especially if you're not as proud of them as you wanted to be as well, because you're going to
No.
see that on a shelf and you'll be like, oh, I hate that
Yeah.
book that I wrote.
I know, don't read that.
Yeah, it sucks. Don't read it.
You're hiding it in the bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to buy that one, don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh. And is there another book in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
There is. I've got one coming out about a year, a little less than a year from now, called The Midnight Game. And it is another standalone mystery. It's set in the 1980s in a kind of gritty neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. And it's basically opens up. There's a child is found in the walk-in freezer in a school cafeteria.
Oof.
And the detective is trying to figure out, is this an accident? Was he like playing hide and seek, that kind of thing, or did somebody kill this child? and he happened to be a bully and all this other thing. And as the detective is investigating this case, he's getting to know this like very kind of colorful, interesting school where the kid was a pupil. And he also starts to notice that all of these aspects of the case are mirroring things from his own childhood and his own life. So it becomes this kind of existential crisis and feels a little almost metaphysical what's going on there, as he's kind of like trying to figure out what happened to this kid.
Ooh, that sounds really creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy. It's kind of funny, which is hard to believe because I'm talking about a dead child in a freezer. But like a lot of it is because of the school and the I guess the milieu or the community of the school is kind of lively, and there's a lot of bingo parlors and nuns doing hula hoop and that kind of stuff.
Oh wow. Well,
I
I'm
c-
looking forward to that.
yeah, I can't wait for that. I can't believe we have to wait a year. That's so sad.
We always love to end the Right Club with a book recommendation for our
Yeah.
listeners. And I'm imagining that you live in a house filled with books, your own, and I think your wife is a librarian, am I right?
Yes,
But,
yes, yeah.
so what can you recommend to us today?
So many, but I read recently this kind of older book called Skippy Dies by Paul Murray. Paul Murray wrote The Bee Season. Is that what it's called?
The
No, The
Beasting?
Bee Sting. The Bee
That's
Sting.
my
Yeah.
favorite book at the moment. Oh,
Is it really? It's such a good book.
it's
I love
brilliant. I read it in January in like a week, even though it's
it.
huge.
It's huge, yeah, and Skippy Dies is huge too. So,
Okay.
so I read The Bee Sting and I loved it also, and so I went back and found this Skippy Dies, which begins with a high school kid at a boarding school dying in the first chapter, a kid named Skippy. And then we kind of spend 500 pages getting to know him and his friends and the kind of community of this boarding school. And it is really funny. And he just takes a lot of risks. And it's just a really lovely, wild, interesting book. And I'm kind of surprised I hadn't heard of it because I don't know. It's like such a solid book. And it just I didn't hear about it until after the bee sting. So it's kind of I love that when I discover an author and it's like, oh, they have work
Have
that I
more
haven't
books,
heard
yay.
before,
Yeah.
more books. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I recommend it. I have never laughed so hard reading a book in like ages.
Mm.
But it was also very moving too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's a brilliant
If he
writer.
dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's
Amazing.
really great. Yeah.
I've just made a note of both of those and will be purchasing them as soon as I get off the call with you.
Yeah. There you go.
They sound right up my street. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and we've really enjoyed it. So thanks again. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your literary citizenship, getting the word out there about writers and writing. I love it.
Yeah, we do our best. Thanks for tuning into the Write Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Write Club. Until next time, happy writing.